Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to revisit some legendary heroes. And I mean in a way that isn't just remix, but I mean literally looking at where they stand in the grand spectrum of this game. It's gonna be a big one. Sit down and enjoy.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up, guys? Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is, well, kind of a revisit. Yeah, we're going to be treading the tier list, the rankings, the overall opinion of where legendary heroes lie in this game, why they're so impactful, why you should be considering merging them up, and of course, how it might likely affect your game in the long term. Now, this video definitely has a focus on newer players, so if you're a newer player, then this should help you quite a bit. But even if you are a veteran, you've been playing for many years, then this should also give you some good direction, especially if you don't have merged legendary heroes or you have them just all over the place, or you're just looking to take the game to the next level. The goal of this video should help you guys in some way level up your game. I used to kind of rank these legendaries, I think a couple months ago, and I want to kind of revisit this, but in a grand spectrum of the game, because now as someone who's basically been using legendaries that were really low tier, and now I'm using, legendaries that are pretty good. There is a lot to talk about in this video, so I can share my perspective with you in terms of investing your resources, but also using these legendary heroes to their fullest potential. I've gathered a lot of data from my own experience and from the community to kind of give you guys the grand picture of how things are and which legendary heroes likely could end up really good, or you should consider saving for or using. And I'm not talking strictly arena, because legendaries are very arena Coliseum focused, but realistically they do help in basically every game mode. I've been using, for example, Tiki and Fjorm in all my game modes now when the season allows it, which is water season and earth season, of course. So yeah, I've come a long way, because those legendary heroes used to be pretty bad, but now they're pretty good, and you'll see that as shown in this video. So as I said, for you guys that are newer players, hopefully this will help you get some direction, and for those that are veterans, hopefully this will help you confirm that what you're doing is working, or at least provide you some more direction. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to actually go over all the legendaries in a grand kind of point of view, so considering all game modes as a general kind of like tier list ranking that includes legendaries and Coliseum modes, Aether Raids, PvE, whatever. There is definitely a bias towards where they're supposed to be used, which is arena, so of course those that score better will generally rank more than those that don't, because that is pretty important if you want to be ranking and getting the most out of your legendary hero. But of course, when it comes to combat utility and just effectiveness overall in all the game modes, that's going to be considered here as well. And I'm of course talking Aether Raids, Summoner Duels, PvE, whatever. Like, I have considered them in all grand spectrums. So with that being said, I've actually split this into two parts, which is going to be the remixed legendary heroes and those that are due for remixes, and those that are not remixes. And it's actually really important to separate these two groups, because how you choose to invest will basically determine which banner you commit to, and will likely be more efficient or more predictable than that which is not. And what I'm saying here is what I'm going to point out in a little bit of notes under me, which is, generally speaking, you should prefer legendary remixes over legendary or mythic banners. For example, the Tiki Marth remix as opposed to the Eitri Thor debut banner. These are recent banners as of this video, and if I were to tell most players nowadays, you should opt for the remix banner, track the reruns on when these remix legendary heroes come back, and try to merge them up through the remix banner. A couple of reasons for this is, of course, remix banners have better summoning rates. I've covered summoning in other videos that I'm not going to reiterate here, but effectively you have a much better chance of not only getting legendary heroes on remix banners, but you also get the guarantee of 40 summons equals a legendary hero. And that is huge, because that is guaranteed progression, which wasn't honestly available for players like me who've been playing for years, where you effectively gambled on the worst banners for sniping specific legendaries over time. I still think this applies. Don't be chasing after the newest legendary or toy to try to do that. You can just get burned time and time again. And I still get burned to this day time and time again as I try to finish my legendary heroes. In this case, it's legendary Corrin, who at this point has eaten over 3,000 of my orbs and puts me in a very low, or should I say high percentile of unlucky players when it comes to trying to finish legendaries. If I could redo my account and start all over, I would almost always recommend everyone to target the remixes. Just be patient. Over a span of a year, you will finish your Marth or your Tiki or your Lucina, whatever. This is the place to do it, and that is what I would highly recommend for this sort of thing. However, there are still going to be cases where you probably want to at least consider the legendary mythic banners, especially when you consider mythics and how they affect Aether Raids, which should be in another video coming up, but definitely there is value to the legendary mythic banners that still applies to this day, and remixes should be just that, focusing on legendary hero remixes. In time, if we also get mythic hero remixes and they somewhat overlap with legendary hero remixes, that is a story I will talk about at that time. But at this moment, I'm talking strictly legendaries, and we should have a focus on that. What I'm going to start this video, of course, with is talking about the legendary heroes and how they are in terms of remixes. Now, you'll notice right away on this ranking that there is a question mark tier because I cannot properly rank Grid, Erica, Lucina, and Azura at this time. I could technically put them in with the other ones, but I think it would be a bit unfair as they haven't been remixed. This is evident with someone like Ephraim, who went from bottom to top pretty easily because of his crazy amount of awesomeness throughout like all the modes at this point, because of Kanto, anti-guard, no heavy blade reliance, initiation rather than strictly solo with like these enemy conditions. This list kind of goes on, but effectively I would expect everyone in the question marks right now to be a lot better in time. So we'll revisit this again when those ones get remixed, but at this time I do think this is how I feel about the current legendary heroes. Now, a lot of this for remixes is still, like I said, dependent on arena investment, but also in the other game modes. And at this time, someone like Legendary Ephraim, for example, is great in a lot of game modes because he has Kanto, which is really good. He has special acceleration, anti-guard. He's just really good overall with high mobility. The only drawback is, of course, the B-Dual Cavalry for investment, which is locked to a summer seasonal, and that's why he's not like literally the best of this whole group. Whereas in contrast, Tiki is an armor, far save, scores well, and doesn't require that dual skill, and therefore is a easier investment on your orb cost. And then, of course, right beside him is someone like Legendary Marth, who has our dual infantry 4, which is easier to obtain than on a seasonal, and Marth, of course, is very powerful, but would likely be harder to use in some team comps, without reliance on something like far save perhaps, or you'd need some kind of fodder like distant counter or distant stance to truly try to make him as flexible as possible. So a combination of high investment outside of their base kit, but also just how they're used is high consideration here. Like Tiki, she's gonna be able to be used most of the time with her base kit nowadays, and it's really good because you don't really need to focus among that. Some F2P options, such as what I do with Ashard, is completely possible, where someone like Marth and Ephraim likely need some further premium skills, or they require some sort of team synergies. That is how I feel right now about the remix, but that list can easily change, as I totally expect someone like Lucina and Azura to join those in the S tier without a doubt, and potentially even Erica and Hrid, depending on what they do. Someone you'll notice that isn't listed here is actually Gunthra, and that was just because I didn't really know where to place Gunthra, because I feel like she is pretty team dependent because of her damage output, like team dependent both on enemy and players, because of the way her weapon works, being a kind of like broadleaf effect. She's still very strong, but obviously she doesn't always have good matchups, especially those that null penalties, using stuff like Slick Fighter or Brave Hector, for example, neutralizing penalties. So I didn't really know where to put her, but she would probably be high A or lower S, and I just wasn't sure where to put her here. I'll probably do it in the next ranking list that I do, where more of these are remixed within about a month or so. Anyways, with the A and the B tier, I've talked about this quite a few times, but effectively the lower I feel on the ranking, the less useful they are in not only Arena, but in the other game modes. And this can be seen in something like Grima, Ike, and Lyn at the bottom, because they have specific use cases where they are probably pretty good, but unfortunately aren't overall good, and may require even some premium investments to even be just good enough, compared to who you could get a lot of value from those in the S who use much lower investments and are good overall in terms of even stuff like scoring. Now in the case of, like, let's say Grima and Lyn, this has been reiterated, but swapping out their preference skill, which got upgraded to a dual skill, is a huge downgrade in their performance for Arena, which you would have to do if you wanted to optimize your ranking scorings and, of course, the rewards associated with that. Whereas someone like Marth, Tiki, and Ephraim don't really get affected by it because their preference skills are in other places, and they still benefit from those sort of stuff, like those stats and skills anyways. Whereas the guys in the B, less so. Or they just have, let's say, pretty bad matchups in their particular season as well, which is totally possible. Although stuff like Grima, Ike, and Lyn can see a lot of use in AR, it doesn't really bump them up in rankings to where I would say for you guys to literally focus your investments into those three, and generally speaking, you should just invest in them if they're your favorites, and that's about it. They're just not going to give you enough of an edge as, let's say, Ephraim, Marth, and Tiki would at this time. Those in the A tier are definitely still good, but see more specialty use. So Ryoma, Fjorm, and Hector are all very good right now. Hector is especially good for being a sort of like pulse machine for every single movement type, including himself, and has a solid refine. So he's very flexible as a unit, but he is, of course, dampened by the fact that he can't really use save skills, and mobility is always kind of a problem for armors. So that's why he ends up there. He also doesn't score as nicely as those in the S do, because he doesn't have a preference B, or he's not an armor that scores a 180, like in the case of Tiki. Fjorm and Ryoma are interesting cases. Fjorm is just really good with high investment. As someone who has a plus 10 Fjorm, I can attest to the fact that she is much better than she ever was, and is quite good at contesting her own season now amongst all of the legendaries there. Ice Mirror being a pretty solid special that actually just doesn't care if someone has damage reduction piercing, for example, Byleth, legendary Byleth, or just Deadeye or stuff like that. Just doesn't really impact her at all. She's very good in AR as a tank because of neutralizing penalties and overall stat spread being used for every stat. Doesn't really have a flaw. As a generalist, that's a good thing. As a specialist, it's pretty bad because then she doesn't really stand out when her stats and her ability to tank, as in this case, falls behind, which could easily be the case in about a year, where she's likely just ranked down over time, where someone like Marth, Tiki, and Ephraim will still retain some sort of really good utility in the case of their preference skills or mobility, depending on who it is. Finally, with Ryoma, he is a flyer, and because of that, he can still provide some sort of support through guidance or high mobility through the use of aerobatics as well. And because of his true damage and unique effects that him as a flyer can use that other flyers cannot, such as no follow-up or damage reduction, he stands out quite a bit, and he scores pretty well. The drawback, of course, is that you need the dual skill on him, just as you do on Fjorm and Ephraim, but it's still not too bad, and Ryoma is definitely a really good carry or potentially minor support in some cases. This is my stance on Remix, guys, and as you can see here, Fire Season is in a pretty good spot. You can't really go wrong with either an Ephraim or Marth Remix investment over time. They're definitely very powerful, and I expect them to remain that powerful in the long term, so don't be afraid of that. Tiki is an especially good investment because she doesn't require anything but her copies over time. She literally doesn't need a dual skill, and she's a far save armor dragon, which in the past I would have said was a detriment, but because of the effect of her weapon and that there is less armor effectiveness and dragon effectiveness seen amongst the game now than there used to be, then she is actually pretty good, and she can overcome even those bad matchups in a lot of cases when properly used and supported. You really cannot go wrong with Tiki being Earth or Marth Ephraim a Fire investment, but that does leave the other seasons in quite a lot of doubt, which is of course the Wind season and the Earth season. Going through it technically, as I mentioned, would stand somewhere in S and A, but the problem is that her dual skill is locked behind a mythic, and that mythic would require you to invest into a mythic banner or legendary banner, where you could end up spending hundreds, potentially 1,000 orbs trying to get that dual skill, which would really invalidate Gunthra's investment. So this could change. Lucina and Hrid could definitely come up to the top. We'll see what happens in time. But as it stands, it's important to actually look at the other legendary heroes, how good they are, and maybe consider investing into them rather than the remix ones. I'd say Fire and Earth are really easy right now as it stands with remixes. You kind of know where you want, but with the other ones, it is harder to think about. One other thing I didn't mention before we go on to the legendary heroes and where I feel about them, those that aren't on the remix agenda, is that technically Fjorm and Ike come at a free copy as a new player, or maybe you just have them lying around from being a veteran. That does save you a bit of orbs in the long term, and it is something to consider because effectively it is just more efficient than one that doesn't have any copies at all. Also, Fjorm does run on a rotating bonus AR rotation, which means you get this pretty solid carry every 4 AR seasons. So consider that as well, but I don't think it really is enough of a consideration that you should be investing into them over the other legendaries at all. Now let's move on to the non-remix characters and how I feel about them. With considering in mind that Earth and Fire are definitely good in the remix section, so how do the other ones, which are Wind and Water, end up performing? So as you can see here, this one is a little bit more saturated than the other list. And I want to try to go over most of them again as I can to help explain why I feel some are in the place they are and why some others are not. First of all, let's go from the top and talk about the utility and the strength of those in the S tier, which of course most of you are probably not too surprised by, which is stuff like Chrom, Sigurd, Claude, now officially Eitri joining them, and Byleth. So the reason those guys are in the S is because they provide some sort of utility or effect that will likely stay with them in the long term and keep them relevant for a very long time, among with high scoring and good combat performance overall. That is effectively why they're there, but they're useful in every game mode, without a doubt. I don't really need to go over them too much. I'm sure most of you by now know why they're this strong, but stuff like Chrom having a positional skill in Arena, scoring well, armor effectiveness, neutralizing penalties. The list goes on that one, but he's having a positional skill in Arena, for example, makes your Arena experience much easier than anywhere else, and he's still extremely relevant in both Aether Raids offense and defense, for example, because of course Change Fate is another action and potentially a positional that can help bring other units out of danger. And on defense, armor effectiveness plus high attack. I mean, it's really not much to say more on Chrom. He's just really good in a lot of places, and you'll get a lot out of him. Sigurd, of course, basically is the only character in the game that says that everyone gets +1 movement and all it requires is quick impulse. He does have more weaknesses now than he did on start, which with the introduction of stuff like Safety Fence, Loki getting Stall Ploy, and just overall stuff like Even Pulse Tie or people adapting to his usage. He's definitely easier to deal with, but he's still a very relevant character in your hands as a player, and of course you can see use in him for offense, defense, and Arena, Summoner Duels, wherever you plan to use someone like Sigurd, he's going to be there and he's going to be really strong, plus he scores really well. Like I mentioned earlier, with water and wind being the unconfirmed, like where do these kind of like through remix versus these old legendary heroes, it goes without saying that if you wanted a wind or water legendary that is extremely relevant and you wanted to like look at legendary and mythic banners where there's some sort of overlap there that could help you, let's say in Aether Raids, then it's important to consider someone like Chrom and Sigurd. Because if you, let's say, have a banner with like Regan and Plumeria and Sigurd, then you could be increasing your Astra season Aether Raids scoring while also merging one of the, if not the best, win legendary hero, being Sigurd, of course. So this is why you can't really like say, oh yeah, just invest into like Gunthra as in remixes, or just invest in the legendary Lucina and that being the best choice. It's important to evaluate every banner as it comes and potentially considering your odds. This is why you want to save orbs, as mentioned in my investment little blackboard under me. Save your orbs and be ready to make these sort of choices. If you look at remix banners and you just add like, let's say, a copy over time, over the span of a year, you should be saving orbs anyways, because Spark is about 200 orbs at most on those remix banners. So if you're just saving orbs month after month, then you likely should be accruing enough to eventually pull the trigger on one of these bigger legendary mythic banners and create some sort of great progression on your account, or get one of these really powerful heroes to a state where you will be dominating the game. The other ones, of course, are a little bit less decisive on whether you should be investing into them, so anything after Chrom and Sigurd are definitely a pretty relevant step down. So Claude, Eitri, and Byleth are still exceptionally good because stuff like Eitri has Canto, mobility, flying, high scoring, and then you have Claude, who effectively is the same thing, tons of score, really strong, has gravity, has damage reduction. Byleth dominates water season, being a green and a very blue heavy meta with damage reduction piercing rather. So you see how like just being really strong definitely puts you as relevant, but I'd still say that someone like Sigurd or Chrom with mobility and overall utility is gonna rank above those. The legendaries in the other tiers are definitely more close, and you could interchange some of their rankings, just kind of how I feel about where they stand overall. And you see that like recency isn't always a factor for being powerful. As you see here, legendary Micaiah and legendary Faye, I don't feel made enough of an impact in their seasons to be up at the top. There's just no way based on how they're used. They're definitely powerful in your hands, but they don't have enough utility that would make them stand out as, of course, Sigurd or, you know, Chrom, right? So, unfortunate for them. Some of the other legendaries down there are definitely hindered by a lot of weaknesses, such as legendary Edelgard wanting to be solo, but also being an armor that wants March, but can't use Armored Stride, let's say, in Arena because it doesn't score optimally. Someone like Dimitri, unfortunately, is completely neutered by a bad res stat and has trouble competing versus a lot of matchups in his season nowadays. So, unfortunate for him. Alm and Elwood score, unfortunately, really poorly, but definitely still at least have some sort of really good mechanics, such as Elwood's bonus doubler buffs and Alm's piercing damage that is cannot be stopped effectively. Finally, we have Roy in the Roy tier. Now, if there's one investment you should probably not do, it would be Roy, because he's just not in a good spot right now. Though, to be fair and to provide some good news for you guys, Roy at least should be the first remixed legendary hero that has pair up. That still unfortunately won't solve the problem that he scores really poorly, which is at a 175. So unless they remix the amount of scoring he does, even after his remix, which should happen sometime next year, he's still likely not going to rank up very much, because as you can see, the ones at the top here are still going to be scoring really well and still be really good. There's still not going to be much of a situation where I would say that Roy would be better investment than Eitri. And even compared to remixes that are already there for Fire Heroes, I still wouldn't recommend Roy, even if he did get upgraded, to be better than someone like Marth or Ephraim. I'd see it very unlikely the case. But yeah, anyways guys, this should hopefully have helped you guys kind of get some perspective on a lot of these legendary heroes. I didn't want to go through builds or analysis too heavily because obviously this video would have gone on another probably 30 minutes or so. So I just wanted to provide and revisit the topic of legendary heroes overall, how you can like look at these characters, the investment, and hopefully improve your game or provide some goals for saving orbs and getting these really powerful characters up to a relevant status that can improve your game, right? Discuss in the comments below where you feel about these legendary heroes. I'm sure some of you will say that you have a lot of success with something like Grima or Lynn or Ike or Roy or whatever. Again, every single legendary hero is still good at the end of the day, but it's not about that. It's about comparing them and establishing which ones are more impactful overall versus those that are not. So you don't need to go into the comments and be like, OMG, my Dimitri's completely demolishing everything, because in reality he probably is if you're using him to his max potential. It's just I wouldn't recommend anyone invest in Dimitri over Chrom. Just I wouldn't do it. It's just simple as that. So there it is. My feelings on the current legendary heroes. I will revisit this probably in a few months around anniversary time with an updated one with newer remixes and of course with newer legendaries as they are released, and we'll talk about it then. At this time, I hope this helped you. I am going to be talking about mythics and Aether Raids in general in an upcoming video. I'm also planning to do an arena video as well, just to like really hammer down exactly how you want to be using these and team comps out of them. But that is to come in the weeks ahead. So thank you for watching as always. If you didn't already smash that like button, then show me that you do care and that this video does help me by doing that. Subbing if you haven't already, because I know about 35% of you are not. Do it. And finally, if you enjoy this content, you want to show your support, then highly consider maybe the Patreon below, since that is the best way to support the content and keep me going with these detailed videos. Thank you so much. See you in the next one, folks. Much love. Peace.
It's over.